At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. The year was 1933. America was in the grip of the Great Depression, and across the Midwest, desperation had replaced prosperity. Banks were failing, crops were worthless. Families who had worked the same land for generations suddenly were losing their farms overnight. But in rural communities from Iowa to Nebraska, something unexpected began to happen. When banks came to auction off a foreclosed farm, neighbors gathered, sometimes hundreds of them. They stood silently as the auctioneer began the bidding. Then someone would shout, 1 cent. Another voice would echo, 2 cents. The crowd would glare at anyone who dared bid any higher. And by the end, the property worth thousands would sell for mere pennies. The winning bidder? Usually the farmer who had lost it. These were the penny auctions, a quiet, defiant, and deeply American form of resistance that helped struggling families survive the darkest years of the Great Depression. We finish our episode with a history brief, which goes back to the vault of the History Shorts conversation series and a conversation with New York Times bestselling author Neil Bascom. A quick word from our sponsors.
Sometimes all we want is more of the same, like another round of golf played from a channel with 24/7 coverage, another look at the garden, and the deer as they pick their way through it, another Taco Tuesday, followed by a whatever's in the fridge Wednesday. And to get more of the same, all we need is a little help. With adaptable care plans from qualified, compassionate caregivers matched to your family's needs, Home Instead can help you and your passions stay home, no matter what's on your horizon. Visit Home Instead online for a better what's next.
This day in history. On February 18, 1861, Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as the President of the Confederate States of America in Montgomery, Alabama, just weeks before the Civil War erupted. On February 18, 1930, Pluto was officially discovered by astronomer at the Lowell Observatory, expanding humanity's understanding of the solar system, even though its planetary status would later be debated. Story of the day. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the crisis didn't just devastate Wall Street, it tore through the American heartland. Crop prices plummeted by nearly 60%. Wheat, corn, and cotton piled up unsold in silos. For farmers who had borrowed money during the booming 1920s to buy new tractors or expand their land, the sudden collapse was catastrophic. They couldn't pay their loans, and their banks themselves, desperate to stay afloat, began foreclosing at alarming rates. By 1932, 1 in 10 American farms had been foreclosed. Families who had built their lives on that soil were suddenly tenants, or worse, homeless. Farm auctions became grim public rituals. Sheriffs, acting on court orders, would arrive with creditors to sell off land, livestock, and machinery. The farmer's family would stand by as neighbors watched their possessions, their way of life, auctioned to the highest bidder. And then something remarkable happened. The community decided that it would no longer watch quietly. The first organized penny auctions appeared in the early 1930s in the Midwest, particularly in Iowa, Minnesota, and Nebraska, where foreclosures were most frequent. Farmers, many of them members of new grassroots organizations, such as the Farm Holiday Association, began to coordinate resistance. The idea was simple and quite brilliant. When a farm was scheduled for auction, the community would mobilize. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of local farmers would show up together. They surrounded the auction grounds, their faces grim and silent. If an outsider tried to bid against them, the crowd would close in. Some carried pitchforks, wrenches, or just a hard stare of men with nothing to lose. The auctioneer, sensing danger, would keep the bids low. Someone would call out 1 cent for the farm, and no one else would dare raise it. When the auction ended, the neighbors would return the property to its rightful owner. It was both an act of defiance and an act of solidarity. To the banks, this was theft, but to the farmers, it was justice. Rural America had always been built on mutual aid. Neighbors helped each other harvest crops, repair barns, and survive hard winters. The penny auctions were simply that same ethic, applied to an economy that no longer seemed to have a conscience. These men and women believed that a person's worth could not be measured in dollars or debts. They saw the banks as distant institutions, profiting from human misery, foreclosing on land that had fed the nation. So when the law failed them, they made their own kind of law, a moral one you might say. And the message was quite clear: you can take our money, but you cannot take our land. Not everyone agreed, of course, and sheriffs were kind of caught in the middle, often sympathetic to the farmers, but legally bound to enforce foreclosure orders. Some counties became battlefields of quiet intimidation. There are stories from Iowa in 1933 where hundreds of farmers surrounded courthouses, warning judges not to sign foreclosure documents. In Nebraska, a farmer named John Seethinger recalled how locals armed with hammers and crowbars would line the roads leading to auction sites, turning back would-be bidders. Everyone knew the rules, he said. You bid a penny, or you didn't bid at all. Even journalists covering the events wrote of the eerie silence that hung over the crowds, broken only by the rhythm of the auctioneer's chant and the sound of pennies dropping into the dirt. In most cases, the auctions ended peacefully, but there were moments when violence loomed close. Bank representatives were sometimes chased off, tires were slashed, and offices vandalized afterward. And while most local law enforcement looked the other way, state authorities grew quite uneasy. Governors warned that penny auctions were eroding respect for the rule of law. But for the farmers, the law had already failed. Behind many of these actions was the Farm Holiday Association I mentioned before. It was founded in 1932 by Milo Reno, a fiery Iowa farmer and union organizer. His slogan was, "Stay at home, raise less corn, and more hell." Reno argued that farmers had to organize just like industrial workers, to strike, to withhold crops, and to resist foreclosures. Penny auctions became one of the most visible tactics, spreading through word of mouth and local organizing. Meetings were held in barns, schoolhouses, and churches. Farmers would scout upcoming foreclosure notices in newspapers, plan which auctions to visit, and then coordinate signals to keep order. It wasn't chaos, it was a form of rural resistance, carefully choreographed to preserve both dignity and property. And at the heart was the belief that the economy should serve the people, not the other way around. By 1933, as foreclosure resistance spread, the crisis finally reached Washington. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office that March, he was flooded with reports of rural unrest, penny auctions, farm strikes, and even vigilante justice. Roosevelt's New Deal responded directly to these pressures. The Emergency Farm Mortgage Act of 1933 and the Farm Credit Act created federal programs to refinance farm loans and prevent further foreclosures. By offering low-interest loans and extending repayment periods, the government eased tensions in the countryside. The penny auctions, while never officially sanctioned, had worked, not by overthrowing the system, but by forcing it to change. They reminded the nation that even in a capitalist economy, there must be limits to greed, and compassion for those who feed the country. The History Brief. The following excerpt comes to us from a past History Shorts Conversation series episode where I spoke with New York Times bestselling author Neil Bascom. You can hear the entire conversation by searching for it wherever you're listening to this episode.
If I'm really fascinated with somebody or some event, I will write a book about it. I'll tell you the story of The Salt March, which is a book that I have coming out in September. And it's a story about Gandhi in India, really in 1930, where he decided to rebel against the British Raj by protesting a tax against salt, which seemed a very odd thing to protest against, but created this movement that in a very tight way gives you a window into not only Gandhi's story and his biography, but his nonviolent methods and his means of organization, and really tells the whole story of Gandhi through this very tight, pretty dramatic story of this march to the sea and of rebelling against the British, and then some pretty violent events subsequent to that. And it's a story that I've been carrying around with me for 12 years. And I've been trying to find different avenues to tell it. But, I'll have a dozen of those kind of stories that I've read about that have piqued my interest, that I'm researching and considering about how and if I can turn them into a full-fledged narrative. And so the Salt Thief, which is actually, it's going to be my first young adult original book. I decided the best avenue for it was for high school students, junior high students. It's, again, as I said, like this very tight, compelling narrative that also gives you a wider view on Gandhi, this seminal figure. And I just dove into it and loved it.
Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you are enjoying this show and would like to help me with its production, you can always donate a few dollars or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.